You know, there was a time in the 1980s when science fiction stopped being polite. These movies weren't just about aliens, robots, or the future. They were angry, violent, political, and deeply uncomfortable. And that absolutely terrified people. So government stepped in, ratings boards panicked, studios hacked endings apart, TV broadcasts butchered the movies beyond recognition. Some of these movies were censored for violence, some for sexuality, some for politics, and some were censored simply because they felt too real. These are the 80s sci-fi movies that pushed too far. They were banned, censored, altered, and lived forever because of it. I've got 10 here, so pop that tape in. I got you. Let's go do this. Alright, so we're kicking off this list of 10 controversial, banned, altered, censored sci-fi movies from the awesome 1980s with one of my favorites, 1987's RoboCop. This one is one that had a censorship battle of the decade. This thing was infamous, directed by one of my favorite directors, Paul Verhoeven, and starring Peter Weller. RoboCop is set in sort of a privatized, crime-ridden, futuristic, dystopian Detroit where corporations literally own the police. And after Officer Murphy is brutally executed, he is resurrected as a corporate-controlled lawman who's part human, part product, really. And the MPAA absolutely lost it over this movie. Despite being a satire, RoboCop was repeatedly rejected for an R rating. Verhoeven was forced to trim the violence and some sexuality frame by frame, shortening death scenes, softening sound effects even, and even adjusting blood squibs just to satisfy the ratings boards who either didn't get the joke or didn't want audiences laughing at how brutal the violence had become. Internationally, though, it was even worse. The UK and Germany released very heavily cut versions, and for years, the full uncut edition was hard to see. And the irony was, the violence was the message, and censorship only proved the movie right. I loved this movie then. I love it now. RoboCop comes in at number 10. Now, the next one on our list is from 1980, and it actually was such an important film, it just got a 4K release from the Criterion Collection. I am talking about Altered States. This is one of the strangest studio films ever released, and to be honest, this one's not 100% for me, but that's not what we're talking about here. This one is directed by Ken Russell, and it stars William Hurt in his breakout role. Altered States follows a scientist experimenting with sensory deprivation and hallucinations and hallucinogens, only to discover he may be physically devolving into a earlier form of humanity. The movie definitely rattled the censors. It blended science, religion, nudity, transformation, body horror, cosmic, almost H.P. Lovecraft style horror into a giant melting pot. The international versions were trimmed. Television broadcasts were very, very heavily edited, and the film was repeatedly flagged for its sort of primal, imagery and existential implications. Altered States wasn't censored because it was gory. It was censored because it asked terrifying questions about identity, evolution, if it was even a thing, and whether science could erase humanity entirely. This one is really deep. Altered States comes in at number 9. Now, next up on the list is definitely one of my favorites and my absolute favorite David Cronenberg film. That is Videodrome. I love James Woods in this movie, but the censors absolutely did not. This one is sort of time turning into media itself, turning into body horror. It asks a lot of questions about who is good, who is morally right, all that kind of stuff. It stars James Woods, as I said, as a sleazy TV executive who discovers a pirate broadcast so extreme that it literally rewires the human brain. Flesh sort of merges with technology. Reality itself collapses. The film was cut and restricted across all of UK and Australia and targeted during the whole video nasty panic and absolutely butchered on worldwide television. And the real problem here wasn't just the imagery, which Cronenberg tends to go over the top with. It was the idea that the media could control perception, desire, and identity, and maybe, just maybe, this film was absolutely prophetic. It was way ahead of its time, definitely relevant for right now. It feels way, way less like science fiction, more like prophecy and science fact. Videodrome, one of my favorites. Now, when we're talking favorites, if you follow me on this channel, you're going to know I love John Carpenter. He is my second favorite director of all time. But that didn't stop him from running afoul of censors and the MPAA quite frequently, including on what seems to be a little bit mild for this list, 1988's They Live. Listen, Rowdy Roddy Piper is here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and he's all out of bubblegum, and he was almost all out of luck with the MPAA and censors. John Carpenter and They Live, this is his most blunt movie. Like, this is straight to the point. It's satire, but it's right in your face. Rowdy Roddy Piper plays a drifter who discovers sunglasses that reveal not only subliminal messages, but alien overlords hiding in plain sight. Obey, consume, no independent thought. Sounds familiar today. While not officially banned, They Live was frequently very heavily censored and altered on television and in the international markets, especially its legendary alley fight, which had a very aggressive anti-sort of authority tone and is one of the longest fights ever committed to celluloid. Very much chopped down, but Carpenter refused to soften his message. He smashed you over the head with it, and that made people, especially the censors, chopping it for TV, very uncomfortable. They Live checks in on our list. Now, next up on our list is one that I actually just revisited myself on 4K physical media, the legendary Heavy Metal. This is an animated sci-fi feature that caused a full-blown moral panic. Based on the magazine or comic book Heavy Metal, it is a rock-fueled sort of anthology packed, literally packed with sex, nudity, violence, gore, and an apocalyptic fantasy story here. It was banned outright in Ireland, completely banned, restricted across all of Europe, and very heavily edited for television, like down to nothing. And the biggest issue was animation was still viewed as for kids, despite the fact that this had Ivan Reitman behind it, huge rock bands, you had John Candy's voice, you had lots of people that you know and recognize as a part of this movie. It sort of shattered the movie illusion of cartoons being just for kids, and censors completely panicked at that. This is a legendary film, 100% should be on this list because it is not for the faint of heart even today, but it is awesome. Heavy Metal. Now, next up on the list is Terry Gilliam's 1985 sci-fi classic Brazil. Now, this is probably one of the most important censorship stories of the entire decade because this one didn't come from the government. It didn't really come from the MPAA or anything like that. This one is directed by Terry Gilliam, and Brazil is about a bureaucrat who has a nightmare about paperwork and authoritarian systems and escapes through a fantasy. None of that is a problem. The government wasn't a problem. No, censorship wasn't a problem. It was Universal Pictures. They hated the bleak ending of this movie. They forced an alternative version known as the Love Conquers All cut, complete with a fake happy ending. Gilliam publicly fought back against that ending, even taking out full-page ads, shaming the studio. Eventually, the director's cut won out, but for a time, Brazil existed in two conflicting versions, which is fitting for a movie about fractured reality in a lot of ways. Now, it was censored still for TV cuts, but this is one that is here because of that weird censorship and editing done within its own studio. Brazil by Terry Gilliam had to be on this list. Now, what would a list about sci-fi or horror and censorship and crazed out, panicked MPAA and censors be without a little Roger Corman? So how about 1981's Galaxy of Terror? This is low-budget sci-fi horror, and this one became infamous for one reason. Produced by Roger Corman, Galaxy of Terror was banned in the UK during the whole video nasty panic, largely due to one single disturbing death scene that involved sort of sexualized violence in a way. And ironically, future absolute legend James Cameron worked on this movie early in his career and filmed this scene as the second director on here. It wasn't really banned for its ideas or anything like that. It was banned for crossing a line that nobody wanted to defend at that point. It didn't matter that you had James Cameron back there. Nobody knew who he was yet. You had Bill Paxton involved in this thing, Roger Corman. It didn't matter. This one pushed just a little too hard on that one direction. Now, you can see the uncut version today, particularly with the Scream Factory 4K. It's out there, and in a lot of ways, maybe it seems a little tame for what it shows, but 1981, it pushed the panic button on the censors. So for that reason, Galaxy of Terror is on our list. Well, we couldn't stay away from David Cronenberg too long. He's just sort of the king of lists like this when it comes to censorship, banned movies, controversial films, all that kind of stuff. And nowhere was that any different than 1981's Scanners. The entire censorship saga comes down to that one unforgettable moment in Scanners, and it is explosive. Let's just say that. Cronenberg's Scanners follows telepaths created by corporate experiments. And until someone's head blows up and explodes in a very realistic, sort of terrifying way, everything was all good. But that moment pushed everything over the edge. That single scene led to bans, heavy restrictions worldwide. Television versions removed it completely. International cuts softened it or completely erased it. And yet, because of all of the attention, what did it ultimately end up doing? It just made that scene even more famous or infamous and created a bigger buzz around the film Scanners. David Cronenberg, legendary for appearing on lists like this. He does it here with Scanners. And just like David Cronenberg, you have more John Carpenter here, and he's not usually one that pops to your mind when you think about controversy and things like that, but boy, his movies really did trigger the MPAA and censors in a lot of ways, including with his misunderstood classic that became maybe the best horror film, sci-fi film ever, 1982's The Thing. Now this thing is considered an absolute masterpiece. There is no doubt, but at the time, critics hated the movie. Audiences sort of recoiled from it. They just saw E.T., they were all into that. But the censors, they're the ones that got a hold to it and started doing some trimming of that. John Carpenter's, this is like his Antarctic nightmare, paranoia, isolation, snow. It was labeled too bleak, too nihilistic, and too grotesque for censors. International versions were cut to pieces. TV airings were butchered. All the good parts edited out for TV, like he talks about in Scream. The good stuff is just sort of edited for television. This thing was treated like a moral failure, a cinematic failure. Now we see how wrong everybody was, and it's totally wild because it is now regarded as one of the greatest horror films, sci-fi films ever made. But back then, it was banned, trimmed, censored, altered in different versions just to get it on TV. That's hard to think of, but The Thing comes in at number 2 on our list. And number 1 on our list is not number 1 because it is like the craziest, most over the top of these movies. Pretty far from it, actually. It's actually at number 1 because it's so surprising that it had so much problems with censors or the MPAA or banning or being altered. And that is 1981's Escape from New York. Snake Plissken, Kurt Russell, Manhattan as a prison, no heroes, no hope. Escape from New York wasn't actually banned outright, but it lived in censorship limbo for a good while, particularly in the UK, where eventually broadcasts were extremely heavily cut. Even the German releases were very much trimmed up and altered to where they don't even flow the same if you watched it. TV versions stripped out all the grit, all the grime, all the profanity, all the edge from it. And here is the key. Escape from New York was not banned because it was so graphic or over the top. It was censored, altered, and cut because it felt too believable. It didn't punish chaos, it accepted it, and that made the authorities in charge of what they were showing you just a little too uncomfortable. So for that reason, John Carpenter's Escape from New York with Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken comes in at a surprising number 1 on our list. So there you go. These movies were controversial in one way or another, banned in some cases, altered, censored, changed, edited for good content. And it wasn't because they were reckless or anything like that. They were censored because in a lot of ways they were honest, they were boundary pushing, they were artistic, satirical, and uncomfortably in some cases, I'm looking at you, Videodrome, too close to the truth. And that's exactly why they survive today and become legends. And that's what I got for you this time. Some controversial and crazy 80s sci-fi movies. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And if you enjoyed this and you want to help get a little more content and help the channel a little bit more, you can join my Patreon. The link is down in the description. You'll get your name in lights on every single video, behind the scenes looks at my filmmaking, special members only videos, 4K physical media reviews, deep dives, and so much more, and everything helps the channel, and I really do appreciate all of you here watching with me and becoming part of the pop culture family. But until next time, be kind, rewind like always. This is Chase with AV Pop Culture, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye. I know.